Alright, so recently I made a video about physical boots. This time we're talking about magical shoes. So quite the equivalent in the magical department. We're gonna take a look at which shoes are used in which situation, which you can use and why, and on which characters obviously. So if you're playing any kind of magical damaging character, you usually want Shoes of the Magi. This includes mid laner, solo lane mages, ADC mages, and sometimes even solo lane guardians. The reason why Shoes of the Magi are so good is because of the flat pen they offer. Flat penetration is really hard to come by ever since Spear of the Magus got nerfed and is not really viable anymore, so you typically see Obsidian Shard being built on mages. Obsidian Shard only has percentage penetration, which means the item is not that great early on, but only when the enemy already has some magical defense. Shoes of the Magi has that immediate flat penetration, which you need to get through the enemy defenses and deal as much damage as possible. Guardians can make great use of this as well, but we'll get into that later. Let's first take a look at the other shoes, namely Shoes of Focus. These were quite popular for a while, but they've really dropped off ever since the Spear of the Magus nerf. There is Dynasty Playtime for penetration now, but most players prefer to go penetration boots and Dynasty Playtime if they want that double pen, so they get through the whole magical base protections. Shoes of Focus would have a decent niche in the support segment, but more often than not, you will get other cooldown reductions items later as a support, and other items are more important early on, or other boots are more important early on. Mid lane mages typically avoid these boots because they don't help as much with early clear, so overall, there's only a handful of situations where you can really use them. Kukulkan could, for example, make use of them simply because his damage scales with mana, or if you're very certain that you want to build a Book of Thoth at some point of the game, then you could consider building these, then going for Dynasty Playtime for the penetration, and then building Book of Thoth. Overall, you won't see Shoes of Focus very much, but it can be worth trading them in late game. Sometimes on your Guardian, you want the extra cooldown reduction if you didn't finish it yet. Sometimes on your mage, you have penetration from other sources like Spear of Desolation, and then it kind of makes sense to get them. But typically, get them late and not early, and trade Shoes of the Magi for them, or whichever shoes you had before. The same as their physical equivalent, reinforced shoes have kind of a niche existence. They have great stats overall, but once again, they overcap crowd control reduction too easily, and they're simply outclassed by Traveler shoes in the early and then don't do too well until very late game. Once again, this is an item that you can trade in a very, very late game on both supports and solo lane guardians if the situation requires so. On mages, you will rarely find this item, same as on jungling mages or whatever. All of those kinda prefer pen boots and don't really make too much use of the stats unless they're getting heavily focused. Traveler's shoes once again fulfill the same purpose as their physical counterpart. They are primarily bought on supports, on guardians, not in other roles because they're typically not worth it, and they allow for fast rotations and faster gold gain in order to get other items online, which is why they're considered the best supports boots by many. These boots should pretty much always be bought when behind as a support. When ahead, you can go for other options, or if you get heavily focused, you can consider the reinforced shoes, but most of the time, if you're behind or even with the enemy, or you're not as fast on rotations when you're, for example, against an Athena, then Traveler's shoes should be a go-to option. With that, we've pretty much gone full circle and we return to Shoes of the Magi. Instead of making it clear that these boots are probably the most efficient option for most mages in general, they also offer a lot in support. Many support players go for Shoes of Focus when they want to play aggressive, which in my opinion doesn't make all too much sense. Shoes of Focus allows you to get your abilities online quicker again, and you have some more mana. But realistically, if you want to go for damage on a support, you should go for Shoes of the Magi. If you get an early lead, then Shoes of the Magi is extremely potent. Especially characters like Sobek or Cabrakan can make so much use of that early flat penetration simply because Guardians have such high base damage numbers. This means they usually don't scale too well, so they don't benefit too much from power, but they benefit a lot from pen to get as much as possible out of their abilities. So to sum it all up, Shoes of the Magi is probably best on mid lane mages, jungling mages, and more often than not solo mages. It can be built on solo guardians as well. Additionally, it can also be built on solo lane supports if you're ahead and you want to play aggressive. Traveler's Shoes is for when you're playing support and you don't want to play ultra aggressive. Reinforced Shoes is something you can consider late game. Generally not the best option unless you have a specific build in mind where it fits in. For example, if you want to build Breastplate of Valor after, or you're just against a very, very heavy CC comp. You will see those sometimes on high levels of play where there is an exact plan of why you're getting these boots. But if you don't know exactly when to get them, you're mostly better off with Traveler's Shoes. Shoes of Focus can be built late game if you have at least one percentage penetration item and a flat penetration item in your build. Early on, it can work on some mid-mages with Dynasty Playtime, and it can function in combination with Book of Thoth, but I would generally recommend against it, unless you know very well what you're doing. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this clears some questions up. Yxloth, out.